Welcome to American History Lesson 14. Industrial Age. Our lesson objectives are: identify key technologies that influenced America, identify key individuals that influenced America, identify and understand the growth of American unions. Technology's impact on America. During the Western expansion, America was continually changing due to the advancement of technology. New fuel sources such as kerosene and coal allowed technology to reach across the continent. This technological growth spurt was aided by the readily available metal iron, which became the backbone of the American growth. In 1850, a discovery made iron even more useful. The Bessemer process now allowed work to turn iron into steel. When this combined with the open hearth furnace method in 1866, steel started to be mass-produced. Steel proved vital to the growing nation and could be found just about everywhere. Steel was used in building the railroad across America, on farms in the form of plows and reapers, and made into cans, which aided the storage and transportation of food. New York City would use steel to build its bridges throughout the city, and steel was found in the skyscrapers that would dominate the city. The daily life of the average American was being changed by the many advances in technology. The typewriter, created in 1867, and the telephone, created in 1876, made a massive impact on the workforce. Women began to make a big impact on office life, and in 1910, women made up nearly 40% of clerical works. Technological advances impacted the work week, which decreased by about 10 hours, and this allowed people to enjoy more free time. In 1876, Thomas Alva Edison built a research laboratory to further mankind's knowledge. Edison would create the incandescent light bulb and started to plan for massive power plants to generate more power. Growing cities created railways, and businesses created factories that were more efficient than ever before, all powered by electricity. The power of the railroads. The railroads were built to connect a growing nation, and by 1890, railroads totaled more than 200,000 miles. However vital the railroads proved, they were difficult and dangerous to build and maintain. During construction of the railroads, it was estimated that by 1888, more than 2,000 workers died and over 20,000 more were injured. The working conditions were brutal, pay was very small, and even smaller for African American workers. Despite the hardships faced, the railroads were completed and now link the regions of the United States. One impact the creation of the railroads had was on how people measured time. Due to the cross-country connection, people needed to effectively communicate to conduct trade and business. The initial train times were difficult to maintain as many communities set their own time standards. In 1883, the railroad enforced its own time standard that was adopted by the American people. The time standards set by the railroads created 4 standard time zones, and this eased the difficulties in cross-country travel and trade. Another impact of the railroads was the growth of the iron, steel, coal, lumber, and glass industries, as well as the growth of towns and cities. George Pullman would invent a railroad sleeping car, which was in great demand. As demand for the sleeping car rose, he built a large town south of Chicago to house the workers he needed. While the housing was of good quality, Pullman tried to control his workers' lives, which they disliked. Some business practices led to corruption. In the Credit Mobilier scandal of 1868, some officers of the Union Pacific scammed people to earn millions and gave stock to government officials to buy their salads. These actions fueled the anger and growth of the Grangers, farmers who wanted to limit rail companies' power. The Grangers managed to persuade some states to pass laws regulating railroad rates. In 1877, the Supreme Court said the government could regulate industry for the public good. Congress then passed the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, but the commission created was not strong enough to control the railroads. The Depression of 1893 and 1894 would have a larger impact on the railroad industry. Many railroads failed, and a few of the remaining companies purchased many of the rest. By 1900, 7 companies owned most of the nation's railways. The emergence of monopolies. Monopolies would grow in other industries as well. Andrew Carnegie built a giant steel producing firm. Carnegie used cost-saving technology, strict accounting, and effective managers to build an economic empire. Carnegie would buy out competitors and companies that provided raw materials or transported his goods. The success of business leaders like Carnegie helped spur an intellectual movement called social Darwinism. Drawing on Charles Darwin's idea of evolution, social Darwinism said that government should allow free competition in business to allow the best individuals to succeed. Most ordinary citizens could support this idea as it appealed to their work ethic and sense of personal responsibility. Business leaders tried to gain control over an industry to ensure rising profits. Some used mergers to acquire other companies. If a firm controlled all the competition in an industry, it held a monopoly and could dictate business practices. J.P. Morgan became the largest steel producer by setting up a holding company. A holding company would buy out the stock of other companies and have de facto control of them. John D. Rockefeller controlled the oil refining industry by organizing trusts, meaning that different companies agreed to work together to manipulate the price of their goods and services. Critics called such practices unfair to consumers and labeled business leaders as robber barons. In 1890, Congress decided to act and pass the Sherman Antitrust Act, which outlawed trusts, but the law was difficult to enforce and the Supreme Court did not support it. Fun fact, John D. Rockefeller was the richest man in American history. Adjusted to modern dollars, his net worth was between $392 billion and $663.4 billion. Rockefeller was the first billionaire, having amassed his first billion in 1916. By the time of his death, his net worth was estimated to be equivalent to 1.53% of the entire U.S. economy. While industry boomed in the North, the South stayed agriculturally and economically weak. Only industries such as mining, tobacco, and textiles managed any growth. The devastation of the Civil War, lack of capital, and lack of cities all contributed to the continued economic situation. The birth of American unions. Workers in growing industries worked long hours and dangerous conditions for little pay. Wages were so low that all family members, including women and children, had to work to stay afloat. To improve their status and working conditions, many workers began to organize into unions. The National Labor Union, formed in 1866, persuaded the government to adopt an 8-hour day in government offices. The Knights of Labor pushed for an 8-hour day and equal pay for women. The American Federation of Labor, AFL, won high wages and shorter work weeks for its members, skilled workers. Other unions were created to organize unskilled workers. Some unions included women and African Americans, and out west, Japanese and Mexican workers formed unions. The various unions had multiple setbacks. A strike in 1877 stopped the nation's railroads for a week, and in some cities rioting occurred. President Rutherford B. Hayes ordered the strikers to return to work. Labor organizers continued to try to enlist workers in the unions. A mass meeting in Chicago's Haymarket erupted in battle between police and workers. Steel workers in Homestead, Pennsylvania went on strike and shut down a Carnegie steel plant until state troops allowed management to reopen the mill with strike breakers. The strike continued, but eventually the strikers had to give in. A strike at Pullman's railcar factory in 1894 resulted in violence and federal troops being brought in. The workers all lost their jobs. Women labor organizers included Mary Harris, Mother Jones, and Pauline Newman, who organized garment workers. In 1911, a fire broke out in a clothing factory where almost 150 women workers died, in part because they had been locked inside. The public was outraged, and some reforms favoring workers were passed. Business leaders used tactics to prevent workers from organizing. They banned union meetings or fired union workers. When strikes did occur, some asked the courts to end them, saying that they violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by harming interstate commerce. By 1910, union membership was down to 5% of workers. What next? Take the time to go back and review the lesson on your own. After your review, complete the lesson review for the lesson and submit for grading. Remember, your submission should follow all the rules for standard written English. All submissions must be written in your own words and sources used cited at the end. How to cite sources in APA format. When you reference a source within an APA-style paper, whether it is using a direct quote, repurposing an image, or simply referring to an idea or theory, you should insert an in-text citation, the author's surname, and the date of publication within parentheses, straight after a direct quote. CitationMachine.net will assist you in creating citations.